Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Equal Opportunity Committee's 11th meeting of 2013. Can I remind everyone to set electronic devices to flight mode or switch them off completely? Agenda item 2 this morning is an evidence session on women in work with a focus on occupational segregation, and I'd like to start with introductions. At the table we have our clerking and research team together with official reporters, and around the room we are supported by Broadcasting Services and the Security Office. And can I also welcome the observer in the public gallery. My name is Mary Fee and I'm the committee's convener. I'm now going to ask committee members and witnesses to introduce themselves in turn. And could I ask the witnesses, when we come to you, would you mind each of you giving perhaps a small 5-minute presentation on what you're focused on and what you're hoping to get out of this morning's session, if you don't mind doing that. And I'll start with introductions on my right with Marco.
I'm Marco Biaggi, I'm MSP for Edinburgh Central and Deputy Convener of the committee.
Good morning, I'm Dennis Robertson, MSP for Aberdeenshire West.
John Mason, MSP for Glasgow Shettleston.
Hi, I'm Siobhan McMahon, MSP for Central Scotland.
Morning, Matt. John Finney, MSP Highlands Highlands.
Alec Johnston, MSP North East Scotland.
Dara Zahran, Policy Affairs Director with the PETO, the Oil and Gas Skills Body. And our focus really is on getting the right workforce with the right skills and qualifications for the oil and gas industry. We are underrepresented with female workers, particularly around the STEM subjects. So it's a key focus for us to try to tap into this talent pool for the industry and raise the profile of the female qualifications and talents that can add to the industry.
Okay, I'm Jacqueline Kerr and I work for CITB Construction Skills and I look after quality and standards within Scotland. My previous role was directly with Equal Opportunities, but the role I'm in just now still touches upon that. And we are both a Sector Skills Council for construction as well as we're an industrial training board. And you'll probably see from the statistics that the women within construction are very underrepresented, especially within the craft sectors, which is joiners, painters. At professional level it's a bit better, but there's still acknowledgement that it's not just getting women into the sector that are issues, there are issues around retention and keeping them there. And so I think that's possibly to do with the transient nature of construction, that's part of it, but I think there's other reasons too.
I'm Anne Henderson, I'm the Assistant Secretary at the STUC. The STUC represents over 630,000 workers and their families, and nearly half of those are women. So we really welcome the fact that the Equal Opportunities Committee is continuing to build on the discussions that we had with you a year and a half ago. I think certainly in terms of what we're hoping will be an outcome would to just see something has to change. I think that both the evidence papers that are attached to the papers for today and all the work that's been going on over the last year and a half confirms a lot of the evidence that we know where there's inequality and where there's discrimination. So there's a lot of data there, there's a lot of opportunities to make informed decisions, but really something has to change. And when we're looking at occupational segregation from the point of view of our membership, we're very keen that we also look at the whole workforce and have that discussion about the value that our society attaches to caring jobs and cleaning jobs, jobs which are really, really important, but are not paid and valued as such, and which continue that kind of segregation within the workforce. So we see occupational segregation not simply as addressing the issues around STEM subjects, but also looking at how we readdress the undervaluing of many of the jobs that have been primarily done by women, and how we can change the workforce profile in those sectors as well.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much for that. Committee members have a number of questions for our witness panel this morning, and I'm going to start with John Finney, who's going to ask what improvements there have been and what's good, and then I'll move on to Dennis Robertson, who wants to ask specific questions around PETO.
Thank you, Convener. Morning. It wasn't much more than that. Just to try and get some understanding of where there have been improvements, we'll say in the last 20 years, what areas have improved and what have been the drivers for that? And is there anything we can learn from the experience of where there has been improvement at all, please?
Start with the oil and gas industry. I think it'd be fair to say it's a work in progress. It's still a real issue, and becoming more so at the minute, because with the very buoyant sector as it is at the minute, there's a real need for mid-career skills. And the statistics would show that there's early withdrawal from the sector. Very few females are attracted to the sector in the first place, and the ones that are will then withdraw maybe around the age of 29 to 30. And what the industry really needs at the minute to fulfil its economic potential is a lot of these workers who have 5 to 10 years experience. So we're losing a lot of skills, qualifications and potential talent. I think that's really come to light with this particular period of buoyancy and investment. And I think it'd be fair to say that the industry has maybe been slow really to realise the potential and the advantages of trying to be more proactive in attracting females. The employers have a very strong feeling that you take the best person for the job, and you don't have positive discrimination. So the real issue we've got is that females, well, there are a number of issues, a number of trigger points, but a big one is the perception that this is an industry that's not particularly attractive to females. So we need to overcome the understanding of what skills are required at school, subject choices. Then we need to overcome the perception that it's all dirty, working offshore, and a very unattractive prospect for females. And then once females are attracted into the sector, we need to try to find a way to retain them. So not a huge amount of progress to report on over the last 20 years, but I think there is an understanding now. There's a lot more work going into working with schools, with pupils, so that they understand where technical studies, where physics, where maths will take them. And then I think there are practical considerations when females do get offered the jobs. There are actual financial considerations for employers, because there's real bed space issues offshore, and one female is going to require a room to herself, whereas 4 men can bunk down. So already we've got the practical considerations about a very low proportion of females. And then keeping them is one of the key areas as well. So the work at the minute, I think, is going into the schools and trying to change perceptions and culture, which is a bit harder to do.
Before the other two witnesses come in, can I ask you then, for instance, there's something very tangible, the accommodation issue. Is that something that's fed into the design of future accommodation needs on rigs? Because if not, the problem's just going to be perpetuated, isn't it?
It's certainly a recurring theme. It's a theme that has been brought up by employers again and again. It's been brought up through education and with the government ministers about trying to find the right training facilities, because the issue is about trying to ensure the future pipeline. And so if we don't have enough bed space for the employees that are required to actually fulfil the projects, it's very difficult to find additional bed space for trainees to come out and learn on the job. So it is a recurring theme. It's a strong financial consideration, and there is talk around how do we support the training facilities and the additional practicalities for females. But you do have this perpetual problem where if you only have 1 or 2 females applying, then they are going to take up a bigger proportion of the space. So you can build more bed space at considerable cost, but it's a chicken and egg. Build it and they will come, or get them to come and then build it. And it is quite a difficult issue, I think, for the sector to address.
You want to come in on that?
I don't mind. Yeah, can I just come in? I think what I would say, what we see, I think it causes less surprise to see women doing a whole range of jobs. I mean, that's what I see in sort of round about me, if you like. And I think that our young people and children today are growing up seeing that. So there's not a second glance, particularly when you see a female train driver or female bus drivers. Or I've noticed, I think, possibly some proactive work being done by companies when there are photographic images of apprentices and so on, using what we know statistically will be a minority, but using the image of girls and women working and taking up training opportunities. And I think that's to be welcomed and very positive. And it's certainly within the trade union movement, again, what I see round about me, there would be, I think, possibly people still may have a stereotype of what a trade union activist looks like. The actual fact of the STC General Council, for instance, is for the last 2 years it's been a majority of those of the members of the General Council representing all our different affiliated unions have been female. So that's the reality of the face of the trade union movement. And I think those things are quite important. So there's a sort of incumbency on all of us to challenge the presumptions when they're made. Now, that's not to say that the statistics still show consistently underrepresentation within a whole range of sectors. But I think I just see women everywhere. I mean, I think that's what we should look and we should see, and we should be supporting those women who are doing jobs that are difficult or in a situation where there are unnecessary barriers being put in their way. Some of the work that's been done, for instance, by the Fire Brigade Union with the fire service has been really interesting and has encouraged and supported female firefighters. And it actually links to the point that's made there. There's been very practical design work done and insistence and agreements now that, for example, the support units that are sent out to accompany fire engines to big fires that contain separate changing facilities for male and female staff, firefighters, contain basic toilet provision, you can get sanitary protection when you're on site on your job, and those types of things should not be seen as the responsibility of the female worker to have to go and ask and make a special request for sanitary protection provision, for example. It should be a presumption when resources are being built, designed and provided that those things are put in place. So I can see there's some very good practice there, which I'm sure we could be better shared and could be learned from. And uniforms are another issue. I mean, repeatedly this comes up around safety equipment, appropriate uniforms, and you see individual women and girls having to ask for smaller shoe sizes when in fact they should just have been ordered as an option when the company is doing its commissioning around ordering the appropriate equipment. So there's, as I say, there's some good practice that I think we've seen, and I would say I see progress. Not rapid possibly, but it doesn't mean it's not there.
Jacqueline, did you want to come in on that at all?
Yes, I think with construction and in particular CITB construction skills, there has been a fair bit of progress over the last 20 years. We've had an education team who have been going into schools probably for just under 20 years, and they have been doing positive action events with girls in the schools, promoting construction as a viable career choice. So that's been going on for a long time. And I did notice that there is some construction work going on outside here at the Parliament today, and that the Considerate Constructors label is on that. So that's something else, and that's industry-led. So that's employers themselves recognising that there has to be a difference in how they approach construction. Also, within our organisation, the teams that we have that go out there and speak to employers, they've all been trained in equal opportunities. So they're out there not just promoting apprenticeships, they're promoting apprenticeships in particular to employers to recruit more women and basically letting them know what the benefits are for recruiting more women. We weren't doing that 10 years ago, but we're doing it now. So things like that do make a difference. We do get the level of girls applying, schoolgirls and women applying has been up over the years. The conversions have been up slightly, so it's still not been seen as a viable career choice. And the reason for that probably is influencers, parents. A lot of parents don't see construction as a viable career choice for their sons, never mind their daughters. So there is a lot of myths out there about construction. We're doing what we can. We've trained our staff to actually dispel the myths. Things like practical issues like toilets. You need a male and a female toilet on site, which you don't. You only need a locked toilet, for example. One that locks, and it should be clean anyway for the men. So things like that we're doing our best to dispel, and we've had a practical approach with some of the, you can see set up with the paper I actually put in with some of the initiatives that we've done over the years. And there's one where we're working with the Scottish Resource Centre for Women in Science and Engineering just now, and there's a project where it's very practical too. Women are getting work experience with employers, and it gives them the opportunity to showcase themselves. We're supporting them in relation to childcare. So there is, I think that the heart is there to actually change the image of the sector. We've also had a positive image campaign. You were speaking about seeing more young women within our own literature. So a lot has changed. 20 years ago, we didn't have that. It was just a typical recruit of a white male that would know all our literature. So there has been a number of changes. Small ones, granted, but quite a lot.
Anything else? No? Just before I bring in Dennis Robertson, can I specifically ask Dara something around the STEM stuff and loss of women from STEM industries? And I noticed from the paper, it says 73% of women graduates are lost from STEM compared with 48% of male graduates. Now, this may seem a really simplistic question, but even 48% of male graduates leaving STEM is a significant number. And I just wonder, have any studies been done as to why so many people leave? And are there differences between why men and women leave?
I don't have the information around that, because that is a wider statistic than the oil and gas industry. I think just from my wider knowledge, and certainly working in the energy sector for a few years, I think one of the problems is finding graduate employment, and that might be a reason why you lose the men, because these are traditionally male-dominated sectors and they're still not going into them. So I think there is an issue there about maximising someone's skills and potential when they come out of university. There seems to be, in a general point, there seems to be a gap between where universities feel they've done their job and where employers feel they need to pick up the graduate and do their job. And a lot of the issues that come back are they're not employable, they've got the wrong attitudes, they're not fit for purpose when they've got their degree or their HND or whatever. So I think that will reflect quite a lot of why people leave STEM in general and maybe move into finance or move into other sectors. In terms of the females, I think it does then come back, not necessarily to a lack of willingness of employers to employ females, but I think it does come back to the culture issue, to the perception of where STEM can take you in some of the engineering fields as opposed to medicine or finance. And so the other thing is it's a self-perpetuating problem, certainly in the oil and gas sector. Females who may be attracted to apply get there and they find themselves in a male-dominated environment. And because it's a male-dominated environment, there's very little provision made for females, so the females who do make it there leave. So, I think for oil, the STEM issue is slightly different to the oil and gas issue. But I think that a key area for both of them is where do they go once they've got their STEM degree? And are employers picking them up quickly enough? Are they underutilising their degrees, or are they just looking for the firsts and the 2-1s and not actually bringing along the graduates who've got real potential in the workplace but academically are deemed to be, less attractive?
So, and again, it may be a simplistic question, but if there was one thing that could be done to change that, is it simply there's a gap between leaving university and getting into employment? Is there something missing that could be done to help bridge that gap and help retain people?
I think it works very well where there are strong internship opportunities in place. There are some employers now in the oil and gas industry who are very proactively trying to get female graduates on board, because when you look at some of the experiential tests or some of the assessments, females actually do them very well. They come out as top performers when you're looking at vocational applicable tests. So I think there needs to be closer industry and academic liaison to say, how do we get this academic achievement married with this vocational requirement and have people coming out of their academic experience with more realism and more practical skills about how to transfer that into the place of work. And I think STEM in particular, it maybe exacerbates that.
Thanks for that. Marco, did you have a supplement?
Just to expand on something you were hinting at there, where do these STEM graduates go? You mentioned finance. Is that the main place they seem to go?
Anecdotally, we know that you get a lot of people with strong mathematical skills going into finance or going into other high-earning industries and not necessarily staying. I mean, my understanding is more around engineering and some of those higher level qualifications. But if if engineers are coming out and being underutilised in the workplace, then they go to a high-earning sector which wants them. And finance, the financial services have been very good at their proactive recruitment. Recently they've been trying to overcome, I think, probably quite a negative image, and they have been very positive in their recruitment and sector attractiveness.
Alex, did you want to come in?
Can I ask specifically, when we're looking at high performers who are entering an industry like oil and gas, one of the reasons why they leave are, as I think you were suggesting there, they're being recruited to go and do other high performance jobs. I'd be interested in your view as to whether there is a difference between in that effect between men and women. And whether it may even be the case that because women who enter the oil and gas industry in smaller numbers and achieve that experience are then even more attractive in the workplace to other types of employers?
I think there's a culture of maybe positive promotion, positive recognition, yes. Certainly in the oil and gas industry there is generally a strong feeling that the best person for the job gets the job. So I think you would probably find this in any profession that is predominantly male-oriented.
What I mean is a woman who has made the grade in the first 10 years of a career in oil and gas, is she then likely to be more attractive to an alternative type of employer than her male counterpart is?
Well, there's a lot of headhunting and skills transferability across the oil and gas. And what I was going to say is where a female actually has overcome a lot of the barriers in a male-dominated environment, they do show a lot of attributes and a lot of drive and a lot of ambition that is obviously going to be very attractive. The reason that I think the sector then starts to lose them once they hit 30 is probably down to work-life balance and culture and male-dominated work patterns. And so I think it's understandable that if females feel that they can't then balance all of the other responsibilities that come into their lives when they start to look at domestic responsibilities, they're going to go to an employer who will take all of those attributes on board, but also look at how they can work with the female achiever to say, what do you need in your life to make this work? And I think that is one of the issues. The women who break through the barriers are going to have really attractive attributes for all employers across all sectors.
Do you have high attrition rates in the industry amongst men for the same reasons in their 30s, or do they tend to continue?
There's a lot of movement within the industry because of the culture of the industry, where there's contractors and headhunting, and it's a very affluent industry where people are attracted to day rates and contractual arrangements. So there's a lot of movement within and across organisations, but there are high attrition rates within the industry. But obviously contractual work, and only 10% of the industry work offshore, so that in itself is a perception that I think we need to try and address. But in terms of the movement and the transferability, the attrition within the sector is good, but not for females who find that the work patterns don't suit them sometimes.
I'm now going to bring in Dennis Robertson. I think there's more questions around oil and gas, and then I'll move on to John Mason with some questions about schools and education.
My apologies to the other witnesses, but perhaps I'll be able to bring you in just a few minutes. But Dan, maybe with regard to APITO, you've touched on many of the areas already, and I just want to maybe explore some of the sort of perception areas with you at the moment. Within the energy sector, the job opportunities are vast and varied. Is enough being done to try and ensure that we're not just talking hard hats and overalls, that we're also talking, aviation in terms of helicopter pilots, we're talking project management, we're talking geophysicists, we're talking, a whole range, of supply ships. The opportunities are vast, and I'm certainly very familiar with the Your Future, Your Energy modules that are being taught in the schools at the moment. But the other thing is that there seems to be a bit of competition with some of the bigger companies like BP, for instance, taking post-grads, and that's all they take. They don't seem to sort of widen the net out a wee bit. I'm just wondering, why is that, and does that not restrict then some of the opportunities for for our young women?
The attrition rates for the APITO Modern Apprenticeship Scheme are the highest, or one of the highest in Scotland. So there are recruitment channels at every tier the industry. APITO have got a website, which is myoilandgascareers.com, which is to try and encourage people to think about the breadth of opportunities and the breadth of skills that are required within the industry, and not just offshore and not just hard hat. It's no longer a dirty industry. And so a lot of the marketing using female role models where possible is starting to filter its way through schools. We work with Education Scotland, we work with Skills Development Scotland to try and do exactly that, show the breadth of skills, the breadth of opportunities on and offshore. So I think the tide's turning there. As I say, there are a few employers, I can't comment specifically on BP, but there are a few employers who are very deliberately looking at the range of talent out there and trying to attract the range of talent to give themselves and the industry and indeed the school leavers the widest possible choice while retaining them and attracting them to the industry. So, I mean, I think geophysicists, divers, project managers, technicians, engineers, that we're really working hard to say it's not just about going in a helicopter offshore. And by the way, would you like to fly a helicopter? So, I think there are lots of attempts to say yes, the whole breadth of the industry should appeal to nearly everybody coming through a school or a college at some point. So yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point to make. The organisations are very health and safety aware, they're very risk averse, they're getting more conscious of the need to attract everybody. So as I said earlier, it's a work in progress, but I think the industry is now very keen to come together to say, this has been self-defeating to just look out for ourselves, so how can we work with the schools, with the education authorities, with the colleges and universities, and specifically with the schools to say this is a great industry and it's got 40 years left at the very least. Come and work with us.
Is enough being done in terms of job fairs throughout the whole of Scotland, not just specifically in the Aberdeenshire and north east of Scotland? Do you think APITO's doing enough to take that message out to the rest of Scotland with the opportunities that's available?
The rest of Scotland or the rest of the UK? Because I think it's fair to say we're doing both, but obviously the hub around oil and gas has always traditionally been in the northeast. We are working much more closely with other local authorities. We have a mechanics in practice programme that we're piloting in Aberdeen, which is about getting S1 and S2 pupils understanding what mechanics does, what technical studies does, and how you apply physics in the workplace, in an attempt to try to open their minds to subject choice. And this is a kit that we would want to roll out through all the local authorities to all the schools and really tap into that Central Belt talent pool. And we do have APITO staff working in the east of England and the southeast, around Norwich and London, to say, Scotland's not that far away, the northeast isn't that far away. There are opportunities outside your local catchment area, and it's a very mobile, transferable sector. We do need schools to work with us. We do need the local authorities to welcome our ambassadors into their schools. We do need them to adopt the kits that are being developed to reflect and complement curriculum for excellence. So there's a lot of work being done, but I think it would be fair to say there's a lot of work to do, and we need to do it in collaboration with these key influencers.
In your submission, your written submission, in fact, you mentioned it in your opening remarks, the sector are still looking for skilled workforce, the sort of ready, up and ready, sort of 5 to 10 years experience. Those skills primarily are just not there in terms of the skilled workforce within the UK. We're having to go beyond the sort of UK shores to bring people in. Is that being a huge disadvantage to the up-and-coming graduates?
I think undoubtedly where an industry has to go outside the UK to find the skills it needs, something has gone wrong. And this is really a reflection of a lack of investment in training 5-10 years ago. And so, yes, it's a reaction at the minute. I don't think it's disadvantaging graduates, because the organisations are saying that attracting the right graduates isn't a problem for them. But to get projects fulfilled, they're having to go where the skills and the experience is. So there is an exacerbation of this headhunting and this just-in-time skills purchasing that I think is going on in the sector. The sector attractiveness work and the future talent pipeline work doesn't really impact on the immediacy now for the skills and experience that's required. And we are working closely with Scottish Government, and we're working through the UK Government to say where can we use the relevant skills in declining industries. So we've got a very strong programme of transitional training at the minute going on with the armed forces, because there are redundancies coming out there. 70–80% of the skills are relevant. How can we fast track these skills to take somebody from there?
That sector?
Sorry?
How many women from the armed force sector?
I don't know that. I mean, it's an open recruitment process. What you find with that sector is that the women aren't put off by the environment of working in oil and gas. No. So I'm not sure that's become an issue.
Yeah. If I may, convener, just with the other witnesses, that sticking with the sort of perception aspect, both in the construction industry and maybe Anne, you mentioned things like female bus drivers. I mean, my understanding is that companies like Stagecoach only have, I think it was something about 11% of all their bus drivers were female. Is it the perception that's wrong, or is we just not working hard enough to try and turn around that sort of cultural, sort of inherent, sort of entrenched view that women just don't do certain jobs?
Well, I do feel that is changing, but I think maybe I was thinking about this. Like, where does the responsibility lie? And I think quite often, including in the way that this discussion, the responsibility often comes back to women to explain what they want or how they want to change that. And one of the things that shows repeatedly in the evidence that's come in is that the culture in the workplace is a problem, and makes it difficult in industries where women are in a minority. And then you have to say, well, where does the responsibility for that lie? I mean, it means we need to look at our own male colleagues, our brothers, our fathers, our uncles, the men in our lives, to say, actually, what contribution can you make to making sure that the workplace feels safe, and that the jokes, endless jokes that really stop being funny, don't make it very, very difficult for women to continue on a daily basis. And a couple of weeks ago, we were down at the TEC Women's Conference, and there was a very powerful speech from a young female painter and decorator, and she was just very, very clear. She said, I'm not going to stop doing this job. I absolutely love it. But every single day, the people that I work beside, the men in particular that I work beside, tease me, and it just becomes really, really wearing. And in fact, she was saying that in terms of the clients, and when you go to workplaces, people actually quite like, a lot of women in particular, like having female painter and decorator around the premises. So actually, from the point of view of the industry and our society in general, it's a kind of win-win. But so we need to look at or the comments from a manager who laughs off a request, or so there's a wider discussion about where responsibility lies. I feel quite strongly that we really need to get in and around some of that. The other thing, I think, just listening to some of the conversation already, is maybe because I know the committee is going to be looking at what you can do and what you can recommend. Maybe we just need to be a bit more assertive collectively about targets. Now, if we know that 1% of a particular type of job in construction is filled by female workers, over the next 2 years, why don't we have a campaign to say we should double that? And I'm not saying set unrealistic and difficult to achieve targets, but if we work together on some sort of campaign and headline thing about where there's imbalance, let's set out to double that. You could also apply that to childcare sector and say work with men in childcare, and some of the other groups are doing some very good work there, men in youth work, to say, okay, so what's the percentage now where we know there's going to be an expansion, and the oil and gas industry is obviously really interesting in that regard, where we know there is an expansion in the workforce, where we know there are new jobs coming on stream. There's some political vision which we can all work together to try and achieve, and say this will change. We can change this, but we're going to set a target, and then we'll look at how we can work with industry and with the unions and with everybody and schools to actually deliver that. But I think it needs something that sends a message which says we all have a responsibility to change this.
Again, within the construction industry, is it the perception that's wrong? Is it just the perception of people working in the construction industry is, again, maybe hard hats and shovels or whatever? Is that the wrong message that's out there?
think that's probably part of it, but going back to what you were saying about the painter and decorator, yes, there is a lot of banter on site. What we have done as an organisation to tackle that is when we are actually recruiting apprentices and they're coming on board, within their first week of coming into construction, that is discussed. There's no point in speaking about it just with women. It's also got to be discussed with the men that are actually in the sector, including new entrant apprentices. They're the future employers or the future bosses. So we have taken a strategy of dealing at it from the new entrant point. And so their induction covers that, and it covers equal opportunities, inclusion, fairness, respect at work, on building sites, regardless of the size of it, if it's a domestic property or if it's a huge building site. That is also reinforced throughout the 4 years of an apprentice's modern apprenticeship through the review process, because they're reviewed 4 times a year by our team, and equal opportunities is discussed and recorded at that point. So they're all small things, but for me this is what's going to underpin that kind of behaviour within the sector. And in relation to targets, we do set targets, but it's difficult to meet targets. It is difficult to meet them for a number of reasons, because it's not just getting the females to apply to the sector, it's getting them to remain in the sector. And to me, that is where we certainly should be concentrating on, is retention. We're losing them, and it's for some of the reasons that Dara did mention. Construction as well, it's transient in nature. There's a lot of travelling, there can be, and when it comes to females being a certain age, if they do have domestic responsibilities, and I think we all know generally it's women who are the primary carers, regardless of whether they're single parents or they're married, and I'm sure most of the men in the room will probably agree with that, maybe not, but I think they generally are. So the responsibility for the children and who's going to look after them, taking them wherever they need to go when mum's at work, it generally falls on the female. And construction and probably oil and gas, it doesn't lend itself to facilitating that. So I think there's a number of, if we're looking at what we need to do, I don't think it's just one thing. I think there's a number of strategies that have got to be taken on board.
I'll move on to John Mason, who's going to ask about schools, and then Sean McMahon, who's going to look at modern apprenticeships.
Thanks,
John.
Convener. A lot of interesting stuff so far, and I was interested in the term influencers, and especially parents were mentioned in that regard, and obviously that's quite a long-term thing to change attitudes, and presumably schools I would also see as influencers, and maybe we've got a bit more influence over the schools. I mean, I think very highly of our schools, and they do a phenomenal amount of work, but I also wonder sometimes how well they understand employment generally. Over certainly my time here, we've heard interesting things. I was at a meeting and a head teacher said they didn't realise there was going to be such a need in both in the oil and gas sector and like Scottish Power in that whole area for employment generally. They didn't realise that's where the needs were, and that concerned me that maybe the schools aren't very aware. And I've also seen, we get people all the time come with things like politics degrees looking for jobs, and I said to one guy, well, happened to be a guy, did the school really guide you as to what degree to take in order to get a job? And the impression I got was they hadn't really. So I'm kind of wondering, how do you feel? Should the schools be doing more, or am I wrong in thinking that the schools are a big player in this?
I think schools do have an influence, but going back to what you're saying, I don't think they know too much about the world of work. I think we need to tackle that. I used to go into the schools like our education team and with construction ambassadors, who are people from industry that are trained by us to become construction ambassadors, and we use them as role models, including women. And it's surprising. It's surprising how surprised teachers and guidance teachers are in schools about construction, because I think it's viewed as it's a last option. It's not understood that, like a construction apprenticeship, they've got to go to college, it's 4 years, there's a lot of learning going on as well. They think it's for kids that are not academic, and that's not always the case. And if you look at the Skills for Work programme, which I don't think it's called that anymore, in construction, most of the young people that actually were involved in the Skills for Work were boys, very, very few girls. So, and it's the schools that are actually putting them forward for things like Skills for Work.
Else want to?
I just when I was thinking there about the role models issue, there's also, I think, the undervaluing of some of the professions and jobs that I was talking about earlier around the care sector in particular are not understood, in my view, quite often within the education system, and it's not seen as the valuable job that we later in life realise you place high premium on. Anybody in your family who is dependent on receiving care, you want to be sure it's very, very good. There was an interesting piece in one of the papers fairly recently where someone was arguing that care itself should be taught within this level of what's involved in caring, should be taught within the school curriculum. And I think there's some quite interesting questions there, because it does, again, get into that discussion about where values attached and what people think about sectors. And there are some parallels, actually, in what you're saying about the construction sector and people's inadequate knowledge about that, and I don't know how we change that. One of the things that was going through my mind was around mentoring, and certainly within jobs, mentoring and networks of women who can support each other has been repeatedly demonstrated to be helpful. And I'm just wondering if there's some, rather than just a kind of dropping in and doing a visit and a talk, and like when I worked in the railway myself and did some work with schools going in to talk about the jobs there, but you're kind of just there once, and I'm wondering if there's some other way of looking at a mentoring type thing, or where there's much more learning about the jobs, and there's obviously some work to do there that people also don't understand entirely what teacher, if you're a teacher, the teachers will tell you people don't really understand about their jobs either, so there's a bit more two-way stuff to go on, I think.
Yeah, I think I would agree that schools are absolutely critical. They have come a long way in embracing the vocational options for pupils, and I think it is hard for guidance teachers and careers advisors to know everything about every sector. However, if we were to address the subject choices more appropriately within schools, so that there was contextualisation of where these particular subjects can take you, and STEM doesn't just take you into medicine, and arts doesn't just take you into law, and maths doesn't just take you into accountancy, I think that would really help. The subject choices are made very, very early. And if you look at the statistics that have come out of SQA, technical design, technical studies is absolutely critical for a lot of our very important industries. But there is a huge underachievement of females compared to physics. Not many boys do technical design, so there's something going wrong there at the subject choices. I think probably in some schools, for timetabling reasons, choices are having to be made at the end of first year. And that means that, personally, for my daughter, she'd done 12 weeks of general science and then was being asked to choose between biology, chemistry and physics. She didn't know what any of them were. She was showing an aptitude for STEM, but the timetabling affected her career choice. And that is maybe the tail wagging the dog. So I think that schools have a very hard job. The curriculum for excellence is certainly helping. The timetabling is not. And I think a contextualisation of these subjects as they go through the schools, not just once they've chosen their choices, but where can physics take you? What will engineering do for you? What are the career prospects? That has to happen before S4 and S5. That has to happen P7, S1.
No, on you go. Yes.
Go on, Marco's got a supplementary on that exact point.
Yes, right, okay.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to ask you if you thought that the choices were made too early. Just to home in on that, do you think it would be better to have more awareness at P7, S1, or to have a system where choices don't have to be made at P7, S1?
I can hear teachers screaming in my head if I said that actually choices shouldn't have to be made. I think.
But I mean, do you think there should be more informed choices where they are at the moment, or that a system ideally should give choices at a later point?
I think it can be a system that just gathers pace as the child matures and as the child's aptitude and talents become better known. Parents are absolutely critical in this, and the information I think that is sometimes given to parents is superficial and a bit fragmented about where sciences will take you.
From who, sorry?
From the schools when there are parents' evenings or careers' evenings, and that is because maybe the sectors haven't found a mechanism whereby they can feed this into schools en masse. So where there can be core collaboration between government agencies, academia, industry, to say these are the materials that every child in every school should be getting. So it's not just the Aberdeen schools who are learning about oil and gas, and it's not just the Dumfries schools who are learning about, and the border schools who are learning about textiles. Actually, every child should be given an equal choice according to the industries that are available to them, not just on their doorstep. There's no easy answer to this. I know people have been trying to do this for years, and timetabling is a very practical issue for schools, and some children will never make a choice if they're allowed. So there does have to be some structured mechanism, but that collaboration at the core to get the materials right, to make sure the choices are informed, I think is critical.
John.
I mean, we talked about, teachers' understanding of the world of work or industry or whatever. Do you think we need to, is the answer to that to get teachers more out somehow on secondment or something and get more experience, or is that putting too much focus on one person? Is it better if we can bring in from the outside people like yourselves, people who work in industry and so on, into the schools?
I think the Ambassador Network works very well, but I just don't think it works consistently across all geographies. But where you have a very influential role model coming into a class and saying, this is what I did with physics, this is what I did with my technical design, that is going to have an impact on children and high school pupils in a way that maybe a very familiar guidance teacher won't.
I think you need a bit of both. I think we also have our education team holding seminars for teachers on the sector, but again there's limits to that as well due to the number of staff we have and the timetabling in school and teachers being able to attend. I think you've got to have that as well as the education team and people from industry going into the schools. I don't think there's enough of it. It's there, but it's not reaching every school. So I think there needs to be a resource, particularly to promote sectors like ours.
Okay. I mean, just the final point was just yesterday I came through in the train with somebody who works in the health sector, and I was amazed to hear that there are only 2 male midwives in the whole of Scotland. I just couldn't believe that, but so it was. So, I mean, I think you've kind of hinted at this before, but I mean, would your feeling be that we should just be mixing up all the occupations and ones that have traditionally been seen as female, albeit probably quite well-paying female if it's midwives, if part of the answer to this is to get more men into these kind of sectors as well?
I can hear midwives saying we're not that well paid, but anyway, commensurate with the skills involved. However, I think like I said in the beginning, I think we have to have a wider discussion about what what kind of society we want to live in, where we're going to put where we're going to put the resources into providing skilled jobs and what we value, and those jobs should be open more widely, and there should be a more flexible approach. So I don't disagree with you. I think that's and there male nurses, male carers, male childcare workers. There's lots of very good models there as well, and that's important to overlap with the discussion around options for young people and what everybody sees round about them and what they understand and value their own parents are doing. So there's definitely a need for a more flexible approach in supporting people, men and women, in training for a wide range of jobs.
Alex Johnson, did you have a supplementary?
Yes, I was going to follow up a comment that Dara made. Now, some of the things you said about education and the experience in relation to your own daughter chime very much with a lot of things that are in my mailbag at the moment. And if you forgive me for asking a slightly personal question, where did you have that experience?
She hasn't finished her schooling yet, so I just hope the teachers aren't watching this. East Renfrewshire, which is a very high academic record.
Indeed.
So they're doing something right.
My mailbag is currently being filled with parents from Aberdeenshire who are having some difficulties which they associate with the local authorities' interpretation of the curriculum for excellence and how they apply it. Do you think there is a particular problem at the moment in the way that local authorities are interpreting their role? What I'm trying to get at here is we had suggestions earlier that this was a problem at teacher level or perhaps at school level. Is it a problem that may actually be bedded at education authority level?
I think this is clearly a difficult problem to address because it has been on the table for so many years. But collaboration and negotiation, I think, and using parental influence and experience more is probably going to help local authorities to understand what some of the key issues are. So I wouldn't say that this is any one particular institution or agency's reluctance or inability to address the problem, but I think there's too much fragmentation, both within and across local authorities and schools, but then local authorities talking to each other and saying, how can we make sure that this is actually an equal opportunity that is put in front of every child in every school. It shouldn't really matter where you go to school, what the quality of careers information that you get and the quality of ambassadors that come in or the number of ambassadors that come in. So I think where local authorities can pool some of their expertise and intelligence and look at best practice. There are fantastic schools and authorities all over the place that excel in different areas. There's not very much dialogue that goes on across local authorities to say how can that adapt, how can that be amplified, how can that be used to best effect for us in whatever context. So, and that is a personal view, but it also comes from many, many years working in Skills Development Scotland and in the skills sector.
Certainly my experience of a number of different local authorities and how the education authorities are applying the new processes that associate with the curriculum for excellence means that decisions about narrowing the number of courses being taken by pupils are being taken at different stages in different areas. Yeah. And in some cases fewer courses are available than others. Do you feel that may actually be having an effect in forcing girls, young women to make irreversible career choices at too early a stage?
Well, if I just come in quickly before my colleagues, I do think that all pupils are being asked to make irreversible career choices sometimes at a time that doesn't suit them. I would hope that nothing would be irreversible, but I think once they get on a particular track, a particular route, it's very difficult then to swap at every stage of your schooling. I don't think that there is discrimination against females for particular subjects. I think it is by default. And that there isn't enough proactive stuff done to understand where there's gender imbalances. So it's not that anybody is, deliberately not putting resource into that. I think it almost happens blindly. And so a lot of proactive work has to come in, because if you can have lots of male gynecologists, why can't you have male midwives? And so it's helping people to break down the barriers of where their skills and their abilities can take them naturally, rather than just going with the masses. And I think that's the issue. And that takes resource.
Yeah. I think I can probably relay my own personal experience. My own son is in second year at school as well just now. So we had a meeting with his careers advisor, and the advice he got was actually very different. He was advised to take a spread across the curriculum and not concentrate in one area. So I'm now confused as to what was the right advice. Should he have been directing himself to a particular career choice in second year, or should he have been going for that spread? So maybe there is a lack of consistency across the local authorities, and my local authority is South Lanarkshire. And they're not too far apart, but totally different approach.
Supplementary,
yes, quite supplementary. We talk about the experience at school that children are having, but do you think the experience at home is influencing the sort of direction our children are going in? I mean, for example, I remember when my girls were 6, they wanted racing cars as opposed to prams and dolls. They were sort of much more interested in that sort of image. But I'm just wondering, do the parents reinforce some of the sort of stereotype and the sort of entrenched culture aspect that we were talking about earlier? Is it our fault?
I think we do to a point, but I think it depends on the parent, and it depends how much knowledge the parent has on this subject area. For me, for my children, I would never discourage them to get involved in anything or pick a particular activity or a particular career route, but that's because I know better, but not every parent does. So I do think, yes, parents do have a huge influence, but inadvertently. I don't think it's deliberate.
I think, sorry, from certainly the STC Women's Committee has been doing quite a lot of work with some of the campaigns around, well, just marketing, advertising, the sort of world that we live in, as distinct from, you know, like parents are not bringing their children up in a bubble, and the like sort of debates about what toys are suitable for children and types of clothes and types of T-shirts and types of goods that are on sale to parents, and you know, there's a whole big discussion out there about the way that the market sees opportunities to sell its goods, sell companies' goods, and how that does cut across some of the work that I think a lot of us are trying to do. So I mean, there is, you know, it's. I think that in the context of even the jobs that you are all doing as members of the Scottish Parliament, there was a wider movement in society, of which the STC was very much part in the 1980s and the 1990s, to say we don't believe that politicians should only be men, basically, and the work that was done to change the way the Parliament was constructed was very important, and some of those principles, as you know, around equal opportunities still feed through the work of the Parliament, and there's some excellent practice in terms of how the Parliament's own staff conditions and their own monitoring of making sure the workforce within the Parliament itself is diverse, and you know, there's some very, very good work being done, but that didn't come from nowhere. It came from a wider movement, and so there is a generation now of young people who I really believe grow up seeing cabinet ministers and politicians as men and as women, and as more diverse than is the case at Westminster, and more diverse than was the case 50 years ago. So I think it has to be put in a context, and we shouldn't underestimate how we all contribute to that, both as parents but in our jobs.
Yeah, thank you.
Marco, did you have a supplementary on that?
As well as the parental input rowing against decisions at school level, what about the mass media? Do you think that's helpful or damaging?
I think it can be damaging. Looking at construction as a sector, if there's anything at all in about construction, in particular in the tabloids, you'll see the usual image of someone who's normally on a certain page number with a hard hat on, like a page 3 type girl, a hard hat on, a pair of shorts or whatever. And I've noticed that image does come across. But putting that on the flip side, I can remember having a conversation with someone who did work in equal opportunities, and I think Barbie had brought out an engineer or something like that, an engineer version. Personally, I didn't think there was much wrong with that, because somebody can look like Barbie and still be intelligent. That's absolutely fine. So even within people who work within equal opportunities, we don't always get it right, and we don't always agree. But I think the media do play a huge part, a huge part.
I think I would say that it was more damaging in the past, and that actually it can be used much more constructively now to portray much more positive role models across both genders. Actually, children's TV can play a huge part in that, and I think the greater coverage of females in jobs in the Scottish Parliament, I think you are working with some of the historical negative images, but I suppose my view is that media is everywhere now, and children are much more media savvy, and it can be used to greater use. So you will find that with our marketing campaigns, we're using female role models and female case studies, and we've got many more options to put those very positive role models out there, and we have to make sure we don't overuse it. That's another thing. If somebody gets into an apprenticeship scheme and they're the sole female, they tend to get put on every poster and every website, yes. You know, and that can actually cause friction within the workplace, where we're saying everybody's equal, but actually we're just going to use her for every marketing campaign. So I think there always has to be a balance, but I suppose my view is that the media is there. We should try to use it a lot more positively and a lot more constructively.
Okay. Siobhan McMahon wants to ask about modern apprenticeships, and then I have a couple of questions around childcare and flexibility. Siobhan.
Thanks, Convener. I thought I would start with just another thing that was said earlier, because I started off in quite a positive mood with the meeting when I heard that women with physics or something you look for, and I thought, great, because I have that, maybe I can have another career. And then as we progressed, I'm always thinking to the future, as we progressed in the meeting, because I'm still under 30, so I was thinking I was ticking the boxes. However, as we progressed, it was said that you didn't think that we could retrain, because, of course, subjects, choices when we're at school are made, then we've got university and various other things. So is there programmes, be it in oil and gas, be it in construction or elsewhere, for women to retrain? Because I think a lot of women, you know, and I'm not talking about me, but other women out there who have been in, say, you know, doing something when they have their children or something like that to fit in with their lifestyle, then want to go back and retrain. Is there opportunities to do that, do you think, at the moment?
There is within construction. Basically, you can do a construction apprenticeship at any age. What there isn't, though, is the same funding actually available for people who have maybe took a career break and come back to maybe retrain within construction. There's less funding opportunities from organisations like Skills Development Scotland to support an older apprentice than there is for youth apprentices. And I think that's the government strategy just now, because there is a lot of youth unemployment, which is understandable, but there is still a group out there like women returners who wish to train within another career. So the opportunities are there, but probably not as aplenty as there is for youth apprenticeships.
I think that, I mean, we would certainly, we were concerned when some of the funding shifts took place and took some of the resources away from older people. And I think, I don't have statistics on this, but our feeling was that would particularly disadvantage women who wish to re-enter the labour market. And it would actually be quite interesting to look at that if you were then looking at positive measures that could be suggested for addressing some of the imbalance, because I think that some women, older women or women at different stages in their lives might be absolutely up for being supported with childcare package built in, but to enter or go into construction or into some of the STEM occupations later in life. And I think that you know, that is a concern. Some of the things again which we know work well, like when somebody is off, familiarisation, keeping in touch days and things like that. There's lots of quite good examples of good practice which aren't, I don't know, they're not shared, they're not the norm. You just get in wee pockets of them and they don't cost very much. I mean, that's, you know, I understand the focus shifting sometimes to young people, but a lot of the other things that we're talking about don't cost very much. And you might well find there's a whole group of women there who would be more likely to complete their apprenticeship and stay, do you know?
I would say it's harder to retrain rather than impossible to retrain, and I don't think the barriers to that come from industry. I think it is domestic financial pressures, funding available, and finding the right model that allows people to train while maybe making a career transition while they've got other responsibilities. So certainly with the oil and gas, I don't think that's a barrier that's coming from the industry. We have been talking to the Women in Science Resource Centre, because I think women returners, that's a huge pool of talent, skills, qualifications. That's where the culture comes in, because if you're coming back from work, maybe having been off for childcare, you're more likely to go into something that offers you term time working or part-time working, and if you're trying to study and then go into a job that's going to make it worth your while to have done a complete career change, you really need your employers to be working with you in that. So no, I don't think it's impossible, but I think you have to be very driven to want to take on all of the challenges that are coming your way.
That's helpful, thank you.
And if you could just give us your CV.
Yeah. I'll do that later. But more direct question, I'm keen to know your impression of the Modern Apprenticeship Programme, the Scottish Government's programme, your opinions, the positive opinions of it, the negative opinions, and how do you see that work in the future? Because I think it would be helpful to further discussions and inquiry to more people who are working day in and day out with those who have been through the apprenticeship programme, and seeing it on the ground. If you could let me know your views, that would be great.
I think in relation to construction, the Modern Apprenticeship Programme's excellent. It's well structured, and particularly within Scotland, if you look at other countries and look at their apprenticeships, in construction in comparison to how we do it in Scotland, it's very different. There's basically there is more than one agency involved. Within the Scottish Modern Apprenticeship, you've got SDS, you've got the funding, we've got the 4-year apprenticeship, but apprentices will also be registered with the Scottish Building Apprenticeship Training Council, and it's still like an old-fashioned apprenticeship. It's a type of indenture, so it's very supportive to what we do, but it could do a wee bit more, I think, to support adult apprentices. But overall, I think our experience is pretty impressed.
Before, just on that, do you think then, because you'll see it again in the construction industry, just solely, the figures that we have at the moment are that females aren't getting to level 3, 4 and 5 of the apprenticeships. They happen to be level 1 and 2. So you see that progress developing all the way through, all the different levels for both males and females.
If a female's coming into construction, they'll come in at the exact same level that a male's coming in for a start. And in relation to a construction apprenticeship, the main trades are level 3, so they'll be coming in at level 3 at a level 3 unless they're doing one of the specialist crafts. In relation to progression, the opportunities are there for whether the apprentice is male or female, just to progress the same way. Whether they actually take it further once their 4 years is up, that's entirely up to them, because they are an employee, and I think it works because they are an employee. And this is where I do think a modern apprenticeship in construction works a wee bit better than a university degree in construction. When we were doing some of the research, that I was actually very surprised to discover that a student doing a construction-related degree could maybe never set foot on a building site, and I found that quite surprising. Whereas, and I think the beauty of the modern apprenticeship is that it's a mix of college and work-based learning, and I think that's where the strength in it actually lies. And I think when we're talking about like further higher education, I think that's where the degree courses need to be structured a wee bit more towards work experience. And then when you do have women who have completed a degree, they're not so surprised about what they find out in a building site, and you probably get more chance of retaining them.
Yeah, Marco.
A very brief supplementary on that. We've seen very, very stark statistics for the gender segregation within the apprenticeship schemes. Am I right in inferring from what you said that there's not as much gender segregation in, for example, the construction degrees?
It's a wee bit less there. If you look at the statistics for construction-related degrees, 14% are women, which is much. It's still pretty low, yes, considering that half the population are women. But it's better than what it is at craft level. And again, I think that's down to image and perception of the sector.
Siobhan, is there anything else you wanted to ask?
Did anyone else get any comments on the modern apprenticeship scheme before?
I would just comment that it is a very good scheme, comparatively speaking, across the rest of the UK, because it comes with employed status, and therefore it is linked to a tangible job, and the employers who buy into it tend to be pretty committed to it. So in that sense, for a funding mechanism that is essentially a one-size-fits-all, the employed status is really important. It isn't quite so effective when you're looking at applicability for the smaller organisations, and in Scotland, and certainly for the supply chain in oil and gas, that makes it quite difficult for employers to take someone on the books and then have them in college for a significant amount of time before they're productive. So I think in that sense that's going to be quite difficult. The age constraints on the higher contribution rate are not applicable to a lot of the oil and gas companies, who won't have someone on site until they're 18 plus for insurance purposes. So I'm not sure that it flexes particularly according to the different industry needs. It flexes in two places according to age, but it doesn't actually reflect the pace or the requirements or the different sizes of industry employers who might otherwise buy in. And I think that's a restriction. The contribution rates are minimal compared to how much it actually costs to take somebody onto your books and train an apprentice until they're fully productive. Most energy companies would say they get £9,000 contribution rate for training. Realistically, it costs £80,000 to £85,000 to take somebody from the first day of an apprentice to being fully functional member of the workforce. So it's a good scheme. it has its limitations, and it doesn't cater to all industries of all organisations of all sizes.
Probably the difference, in construction is that construction employers do pay a levy, and they're able to claim that back through our grant scheme within construction skills when an apprentice is actually attending college. So there is a bit of funding that goes directly to the employer within construction.
I think from and at a future point, it might be, I don't have the figure, so it might be of interest to speak with the care sector and people who are doing work around the future workforce requirements of the care sector and how that overlaps with the modern apprenticeship scheme. I know that a lot of the research is concerned that because of the disproportionate numbers of of boys and girls, male and females, going into particular jobs because of the segregation that then exists in the labour market, there is a concern frequently reported that that unless positive steps are taken to address some of the imbalance at the recruitment point, but in the wider labour market, the modern apprenticeship scheme itself is reinforcing the divisions in the labour market and the wage patterns that boys and girls will then go on to earn. I think there are some questions which need examined a little bit further around how much the modern apprenticeship schemes are accommodating BME young people with disabilities, and some of the other details which we tend to focus on the male-female disaggregated statistics, but not on the other aspects of our lives which are really important. So, and the final thing is, as I've raised, we've the STC's raised this before in committee, but I think that there needs to be a little bit more consideration given to the fact that young people do become parents quite often before the age of 25, and that there should be some more thought given to how we would support the schemes, support young parents, either in childcare or in, for instance, if maternity leave, how maternity leave is funded and managed during a modern apprenticeship, and issues like that which have not really been given great attention.
That's helpful, thank you. And one of the things, and you just mentioned that I had jotted down was disabled women. Now, again, Joe, we have the construction industry with the oil gas today. Is there schemes, because I noticed in some of the briefings, particularly Opito said the operating model is unique. Is there opportunities for disabled women to get involved in those sectors? Because I would think as myself, as a disabled woman, looking at that those are sectors that I can't get involved in. Do you see that, or is that just a perception that's out there in society that we can break down?
I think it's a perception, and again, there is many people who have been supported through apprenticeships with a disability, and it will depend on the disability. I mean, putting away the disability, what their ability is and what they can manage. But there is support for people with disabilities within apprenticeships, and usually what will happen is we'll look at there'll be kind of multi-agency support. If it's someone who maybe needs who has a hearing impairment, maybe needs an interpreter, usually they'll be supported by us, by Skills Development Scotland, and by the colleges and other agencies such as Remploy. So there is awareness of disabilities within apprenticeships and how we actually tackle that or manage it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, only 10% of the workforce, which is nearly 500,000 people, works offshore. And there are plenty of opportunities across all levels, all tiers of the industry to have everybody apply. So I don't have statistics, but I think the perception is maybe more misleading than the reality.
Just finally, Jacqueline, you mentioned equal opportunities training a few times now. I was just wondering what that means in practice. What is equal opportunities for you when you are taking people through that?
I think for us, I mean, when we look at equal opportunities and when we've delivered training, we had quite a multifaceted approach to that. We delivered this training. It's more in fairness and inclusion and respect to our own staff who are out there promoting the sector, promoting apprentices within the sector regardless of background. So we trained our staff. We also went into colleges and universities, and we have provided training workshops and equal opportunities to apprentices as well as students who have been on a construction-related degree course. So for us, it was very, very practical, and basically in dispelling those myths about toilets and things like that. Very practical, hands-on. So more about the point of inclusion and fairness and respect, and what what apprentices students and our staff should expect from within their workplace, and how they should basically behave within the workplace. What's expected of them. Okay.
Can I then pick up the subject of childcare and flexibility? And childcare and flexibility are key things that have been raised when we've had roundtable sessions here at the Women's Employment Summit and at the recent International Women's Day conference in here. And it seems that childcare and lack of childcare and lack of flexibility have a huge impact on where women are segregated and clustered in the jobs market. And while there's a recognition that we need to get more women into male-dominated employment, I think we also have to get more men into female-dominated employment. But underpinning all of that is the lack of childcare and flexibility in the workplace. And I know the STUC has been very vocal on the issue of childcare and flexibility. But I'd be interested to know from Jacqueline and Dara what is being done in construction and oil and gas to tackle lack of childcare, what you do to encourage flexibility, how you support women. But if I could start with Anne, if you could maybe give us a bit of background on what the STUC have been doing and what more you would like done.
Yeah, thank you. It's true that every single discussion that we have about the labour market in any way brings up the question of childcare, and so the STUC's view is that we require a fundamentally different approach to move away from a sort of demand side led situation to basically accepting that the provision of childcare it just should be there. It should be a statutory function delivered by public bodies or whatever. The difficulty with the childcare arrangements we have at present, where there's so much dependence on the private sector, makes it very expensive, which is obviously one issue, but also means that we can't actually effectively pick up on some of the things we've been talking about. So when thinking about, for instance, returning to work, the conversation in families begins by saying, how can we afford a childcare place of £200 a week, instead of thinking, my child is happy and settled in this nursery round the corner, and I therefore can go and look at some of the options that might be there. I could start studying again. I could look at how to get myself back into work. And I was looking at the criteria. We're looking at the labour force survey, the latest labour market statistics, which I know you'll be aware of, but it's showing that women are appear to be disappearing off the statistics. Now, we know that women are not disappearing to be idle. They'll be being busy doing other things, or doing family things, or becoming self-employed or whatever. They're disappearing off the statistics, partly because to sign on and register as unemployed, the definition used by the people collecting data, the International Labour Organization, people without a job who've been actively seeking work within the last 4 weeks and are available to start work within the next 2 weeks. Now, I cannot think of a situation where a woman or a parent can actually give that commitment. If you're, for any reason, out of the labour market or have been on a series of short-term contracts, zero-hour contracts, dipping in and out of the labour market because the labour market is becoming more flexible, more fragmented, how can you plan to and commit to saying you can start work in a fortnight when there's no childcare? So I think it needs a shift, and we certainly welcomed the statements from the First Minister at the weekend in that regard, and the statements around beginning to talk about childcare as infrastructure. But there needs to be a fundamental shift in how we approach the discussion, and linked to that is stopping seeing school as a form of childcare. School's a place of education. The wraparound care that should exist during the school holidays and before and after school, actually that's what needs to be built in to allow people to complete and commit to work.
Thanks for that, Anne. Jacqueline?
I think for me, I've got to agree with what Anne's saying. I think for a lot of parents, a lot of mothers that want to get back to work, it is a financial issue, being able to pay for childcare from when your child is young. And where there is nursery care in local authorities, it doesn't always tie in with the working hours that employers want people to work. So I think there's more than one requirement in relation to childcare. For me, Anne mentioned the summer holidays. I've got 2 children. I have one at 13 who I still probably wouldn't leave on his own. and I've got a daughter at 9. And again, I've had to work out my summer now to juggle the childcare for my children. I'm fortunate, I've got family who can help out, but not every parent has that. So I think and if you look at it from the point of view of construction, a lot of the employers who take on apprentices within construction, they're small companies and they can't afford to subsidise childcare for their employees. They don't have that facility. So to me, it does require financial support, maybe directly to employers to encourage them to look at a diverse workforce. That could be one angle.
Just before I bring in Dara, Marco has a supplementary on that.
Yeah, this may be one of those moments where Siobhan gets depressed again, but
She's got job opportunities.
Why is it that in practice childcare responsibilities still fall almost exclusively to the woman in any nuclear family?
No, I think that's it. We've just not got over traditional roles yet fully. I think that is it. And I've got a husband that's an absolute great help and whatever, but I am so used to, as a woman, I'm speaking from personal experience, I'm just so used to doing things and doing them myself that I have become that primary person. And I think that's a bit to do with me as a woman and traditional roles, same what my mother did. My mother always worked, but again, she was the primary person who done all the domestic stuff in the house. So we've not got over traditional roles yet. I think that's it.
Okay. Can I just answer that as a mother as well, actually? I think sometimes the point is missed. It's not just that you have to be the primary carer. I had children who I love. I love my job, but I love my children, so I don't actually want to just feel them out all the time to somebody else who can do that for me. I want the balance between my work and my home life, and I want to be the one who can negotiate with my employer to go to a sports day or to be at a school's concert. This is a working parent issue as well as a working mother issue, because if I love my job and I want to do my job as well as I can and I want to be as good a parent as I can, then the other parent needs exactly the same flexibility from their employer, and I think sometimes that's not coming to a male parent, and where he might come across more barriers in his workplace because they think they're very forward-thinking employers. And actually, this doesn't relate to my husband, I have to say, because he's local authority, and local authority tend to be very good about parental rights. But if you're trying to get some flexibility in your workplace, you're relying on the other parent getting flexibility in their workplace, and that's actually where gender imbalance comes in as well. I think it can be much harder for a male to say, can I go to a sports day, than it is for a female, because psychologically the employer's got in their head, we need to let mothers go to sports days. So it's actually, the minute you become a working parent, it's a juggling act. And it's not just about cost. Cost is hugely significant. But if you can find the cost, you then have to work with perceptions, with cultures, with employer flexibility, with rights and reasons and policies. And it's both parents having to juggle with both employers and then with the school or the nursery. Childcare through a nursery is very different to childcare through a school because there are different demands coming from both institutions. And underpinning all of that, you need your employers to understand.
Can I just follow up on that particular point now? What support is available in oil and gas industries and in construction to allow that flexibility, to give that balance for a parent?
Well, I think it varies. Because we are talking about huge multinational global organisations who will have very strong HR policies and employee policies. That can sometimes conflict with the working pattern of the industry. If you do have a culture of 7 o'clock meetings, and this seems to be endemic across the whole industry, this isn't just particular organisations, you might have a childcare place for nursery, but you mightn't have a childcare place for school, or you might have a childcare place in the workplace, but then you still have to get that 5-year-old to school for 9 o'clock. So, I mean, I think sometimes there's a lot of effort made, particularly across the big companies, but there's a tension, it conflicts with the reality of getting a child to nursery, a child to school, a child who's sick out of school, meetings that have to take place over breakfast. So I think in that sense, the culture and the intentions of the industry can conflict.
Jacqueline?
I think it will be dependent on the size of the organisation, whether they've got the the facility to let parents go away for specific things, which probably mirrors a bit of what Dara said. I'm not sure that people getting away from the workplace to attend events that are happening at the school is just specific to construction or oil or gas. I think that's probably across all businesses in all sectors. So I don't know, it's just my own view on that. I've never seen any data or anything on it. I think Dara probably is spot on in relation to like nursery provision and school provision and before care and after care. There is good examples. Like within my daughter's primary school, there is a breakfast club and there's an after school club. Both it's a private venture where there's a cost attached to it, but it's there for parents if they need to use it. But to me, if there was a bit more of that in schools and it was maybe subsidised, in particular for parents who are maybe a bit lower paid, who need that, who can't afford to pay for it, I think that's where we need to put some effort in.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I mean, our view would be that the provision of childcare should be free at the point of delivery, and the reason for that is to cut out a lot of the problems that people are referring to. The requirements of shift workers are not addressed at all in the current system, and there's a lot of our industries, transport, retail, loads of things depend on people working shifts, and there really is no reason why childcare shouldn't be available in an after-school club that runs over supper time, for instance, or why you shouldn't have a breakfast club that starts at 7 rather than 8, and there just isn't the flexibility. It won't be delivered in our view. It's not being delivered just now. If there was a big private sector market for it, it would be being delivered just now. So we have to look at why that's not working. And if those things don't exist at a local level, it doesn't free up the potential for the workforce the workers and applicants to go into the workforce in the sectors that are being talked about today. I also think that if there was childcare provision available, delivered by skilled, highly qualified workforce across right up to the age of 16, it would actually free up a lot of the time that is spent trying to deal with flexible working requests in businesses. And there isn't a proper kind of, I don't know what the words are for it really, but a kind of cross transfer on a finance page. All that happens is people, when they look at the discussion on childcare, they say, "Oh, that's expensive." If you could put a cost against the number of person hours that are spent by managers and by union reps and by individuals getting completely stressed out, trying to work out how to juggle a starting time, or the local bus is no longer running, therefore that you have to leave an hour earlier to do the school run or whatever. A lot of those things would be resolved and not being spent in company time if there was childcare. That you just wouldn't be having the conversation, and that's the way that some other countries look at how they deliver that system and that support. But it has to start from a younger age, starting with provision. The limited provision we have, the discussion in Scotland, the state provision starts from the age of 3. You've lost your job by then. And then you're in that conversation about how to get back into the labour market. There are a whole number of other things which the Women's Employment Summit is well worth looking back at that, and we're certainly pleased that the government's continuing with work around that, because some of the issues that have come up from the feedback from rural areas in Scotland, the disappearance of after-school clubs because people have said they're not sustainable, because it's the first thing that if somebody's lost a little bit of their income, they take a child out of the after-school club and then the club isn't sustainable. There's big issues in rural Scotland developing around that, and there are other flexible resources that we're not looking at nearly cleverly enough, like community childminding and things which could be more flexible, but it needs a shift. And I just think we need to start talking to companies about, think of the money you could save if you weren't spending hours trying to work out all these flexible working requests, and yes, we have the right to request working flexibly, and there will be situations where that's important, but we need to look at a bit of an analysis about what a lot of those requests are coming from,
Do committee members have any further questions for our panel of witnesses? Can I thank you all very much then for coming along this morning and giving us your evidence that will certainly help us as we take forward our inquiry into women and work. And that concludes the public part of our meeting today. And our next meeting will take place on Thursday the 18th of April and will include oral evidence on our women and work inquiry. And that concludes the meeting, so thank you all very much for coming along.